The day Clara Whitmore pushed open the Duke's study door without permission, she signed her own death warrant, or so everyone believed. She had no title, no allies, and no right to breathe the same air as Adrian Blackridge. But she walked in anyway, eyes blazing, and spoke the words that would either save her life or end it. I refuse to be dismissed by a man too coward to face me. The entire estate held its breath, because nobody spoke to the Duke that way and lived to tell about it. Stick around, because this story is just getting started. If you want to see how far Clara's defiance takes her and whether the cold Duke breaks first, watch until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. Let's see how far this story can travel. The rain came down in sheets the night Clara Whitmore arrived at Blackridge Hall, turning the gravel drive into a river of mud and darkness. She stood at the iron gates, soaked to the bone, her hair plastered to her face, and her thin cloak doing absolutely nothing to keep out the cold. Her boots were ruined, her hands were shaking, and she didn't care, because turning back wasn't an option. Behind her lay 3 weeks of running, sleeping in barns, stealing bread from market stalls, and keeping her head down every time she heard footsteps. Ahead of her stood the largest, most intimidating estate she'd ever seen, its windows glowing like cold eyes in the storm. Blackridge Hall, home to Duke Adrian Blackridge, a man whose name alone made people flinch. She'd heard the stories. They said he was ruthless, calculating, a man who controlled everything and everyone around him with the precision of a clockmaker. They said he trusted no one, smiled at nothing, and had the kind of power that could crush a person without him ever lifting a finger. Perfect. Because Clara didn't need kindness. She needed leverage. And if there was one thing a man like that valued, it was someone who could prove their worth. She pushed the gate open with both hands, the metal groaning in protest, and started walking. The butler who answered the servant's entrance looked at her like she'd crawled out of a grave. "We're not hiring," he said flatly, already moving to shut the door. Clara jammed her boot into the gap. "I'm not looking for charity. I need to see the Duke." The man's eyebrows shot up. "The Duke doesn't take appointments from survivors?" Clara cut him off, her voice sharper than she intended. "I'm not here to beg. I'm here to offer something he needs. But if he's too busy hiding behind his staff to hear me out, then I'll take my skills elsewhere." It was a bluff. She had nowhere else to go, but she said it with enough fire that the butler hesitated. "Wait here," he muttered, and disappeared into the house. Clara stood in the doorway, dripping rainwater onto the spotless floor, and tried to steady her breathing. She'd walked into the lion's den. Now she just had to survive long enough to prove she wasn't prey. The butler returned 5 minutes later, his expression sour. "His Grace will see you," briefly. Clara followed him through a maze of hallways that smelled like old wood and expensive candles. The walls were lined with portraits of stern-looking men and women who probably never smiled a day in their lives. Everything about this place screamed control, order, and cold perfection. She hated it already. The butler stopped in front of a heavy oak door and knocked twice. "Enter," came a voice from inside, low, clipped, and completely devoid of warmth. Clara stepped into the study, and the first thing she noticed was the silence. Not the peaceful kind, the suffocating kind, like the room itself was holding its breath. The second thing she noticed was the man standing behind the desk. Duke Adrian Blackridge. He didn't look up right away. He was reading something, probably a report, judging by the neat stack of papers in front of him. His posture was perfect, his jacket tailored to the inch, and his dark hair was swept back in a way that made him look like he'd never had a hair out of place in his life. When he finally glanced up, his eyes were the color of winter frost. Sharp, unreadable, the kind of eyes that missed nothing. "You have 2 minutes," he said, setting down his pen. "Explain why I shouldn't have you removed immediately." Clara straightened her shoulders, ignoring the way her wet clothes clung to her skin. "Because you're short-staffed, your household accounts are a disaster, and from what I saw on my way in, half your staff is either incompetent or stealing from you." His expression didn't change. Bold assumptions for someone standing in a puddle. Not assumptions, observations. Clara took a step forward, even though every instinct screamed at her to stay small and quiet. "Your butler took 5 minutes to check if you were available. That means he didn't know where you were, which means your staff doesn't communicate. Your hallway floors are spotless, but the corners have dust. That means your maids are rushing through their work. And the lock on your servant's entrance is loose on one side. Someone's been forcing it, probably for months. The Duke leaned back in his chair, studying her like she was a puzzle he hadn't decided whether to solve or throw away. "And you think you can fix all of that?" he asked, his tone flat. "I know I can," Clara said, "because I've done it before." "Where?" "Whitmore Estate." The lie came easily. She'd spent years watching the housekeeper there before everything fell apart. She knew how a great house ran, or at least how it was supposed to. Whitmore. The Duke's eyes narrowed. "I'm not familiar with that name." "You wouldn't be. It's gone now." Clara forced herself to hold his gaze. "But I ran that household for 3 years before it collapsed. I know how to manage staff, balance books, and keep things running smoothly, and I'm willing to prove it." "Why?" The question caught her off guard. "What? Why are you here?" Adrian's voice was colder now, sharper. "You show up unannounced, dripping wet, with no references and a convenient story. You're either desperate, dangerous, or both. So tell me, what are you running from?" Claire's jaw tightened. She'd known this question was coming, but it still hit like a fist to the stomach. "I'm running from a man who thinks he owns me," she said quietly, "and I'd rather die than go back to him." The silence that followed was suffocating. Adrian stood slowly, his movements precise and deliberate. He crossed to the window, hands clasped behind his back, and stared out into the storm. "You're asking me to take a stranger into my household," he said, his voice low. "A stranger with no proof of her skills, no references, and a past she won't explain. Do you have any idea how reckless that sounds?" "Yes." He turned to face her, and for the first time Clara saw something flicker in his eyes. Not sympathy, something harder, more dangerous. "If I allow this," he said slowly, "you will be watched, constantly. One mistake, and you're gone. One lie, and I'll make sure you regret it. Do you understand?" Clara lifted her chin. "Perfectly." "Then you start tomorrow, 6 in the morning. Mrs. Halloway will assign your duties." He turned back to the window, dismissing her without another word. Clara didn't move. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Don't thank me yet," Adrian replied, his tone icy. "You haven't survived your first day." By the time Clara reached the servants' quarters, word had already spread. The new girl. The stranger who'd barged into the Duke's study and somehow walked out still breathing. The housekeeper, Mrs. Halloway, was a tall, sharp-eyed woman in her 50s with a permanent scowl and a voice like gravel. "You've got nerve, I'll give you that," she said, handing Clara a stiff gray uniform. "But nerve won't keep you here. The Duke doesn't tolerate mistakes, and neither do I." "Understood," Clara said, taking the uniform. Mrs. Halloway's eyes narrowed. "You've worked in a great house before?" "Yes." "Then you know how this works. You keep your head down, your mouth shut, and your hands busy. You don't gossip, you don't complain, and you never, and I mean never, speak to His Grace unless he addresses you first. Are we clear?" "Crystal." "Good." Mrs. Halloway crossed her arms. "Your first task is the morning inventory, 6 sharp. Don't be late." Clara nodded and turned to leave, but Mrs. Halloway's voice stopped her. "One more thing," the housekeeper said, her tone softer now, almost warning. "Whatever you're running from, it's your business. But if it follows you here and puts this household at risk, the Duke won't protect you. No one will." Clara met her gaze. It won't. It was another lie, but it was the only answer she had. Well, her room was smaller than a closet, just a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single candle. But it was warm. It was dry. And it was hers. Clara sat on the edge of the bed, peeling off her wet clothes, and let herself breathe for the first time in weeks. She'd done it. She'd walked into the Duke's study, faced him down, and walked out alive. She had a roof over her head, a job, and a chance to disappear. But as she blew out the candle and lay down in the darkness, one thought kept circling her mind. He doesn't trust you. And she didn't trust him either. The next morning, Clara woke to the sound of bells ringing through the estate. 5:30. She dressed quickly, braided her hair, and made her way to the main kitchen. The staff was already moving, maids carrying linens, footmen polishing silver, cooks barking orders. It was chaos, but organized chaos. The kind that came from years of routine. Mrs. Halloway appeared like a shadow. You're punctual. Good. Follow me. She led Clara through the storage rooms, rattling off instructions faster than Clara could process. Morning inventory covers linens, candles, coal, and dry goods. You count, I record. Any discrepancies you report immediately. No excuses. They worked in silence for an hour, and Clara quickly realized Mrs. Halloway wasn't exaggerating about the discrepancies. The numbers didn't add up. 3 crates of candles were missing. A full bolt of linen had vanished, and the coal supply was short by nearly half a ton. Someone's stealing, Clara said quietly. Mrs. Halloway's face darkened. That's a serious accusation. It's not an accusation, it's a fact. Clara pointed to the ledger. Look at the dates. Every 2 weeks, like clockwork. Someone's skimming supplies and covering it up. And what do you suggest I do about it? Mrs. Halloway's voice was sharp, but there was something else underneath. Worry, maybe, or fear. Set a trap, Clara said. Mark the next shipment. If it goes missing, you'll know who's handling it. Mrs. Halloway studied her for a long moment. You're either very clever or very foolish. Can I be both? The housekeeper's mouth twitched, almost a smile. We'll see. Okay. The days blurred together after that. Clara threw herself into the work, learning the rhythms of the household, memorizing names, and keeping her head down. But she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. And she was. Every time she turned a corner, the Duke was there. Silent, observing, his cold eyes tracking her movements like a hawk watching a mouse. He never spoke to her, never acknowledged her, but his presence was a constant weight, pressing down on her shoulders. The other servants noticed too. He's never done that before, whispered one of the maids, a girl named Eliza. He doesn't usually pay attention to new staff. Maybe he's waiting for her to slip up, muttered another. Clara ignored them. She had bigger problems. Because 3 days after she arrived, a letter came. Mrs. Halloway found her in the linen closet, her face pale. This was delivered to the main gate, she said quietly, holding out a sealed envelope. It's addressed to you. Clara's blood turned to ice. She didn't need to open it to know who it was from. Her stepfather. He'd found her. She opened the letter in her room that night, her hands shaking so badly she could barely break the seal. The handwriting was sharp, angular, and furious. Clara, you thought you could run. You thought you could hide behind a duke's name and I wouldn't find you. You were wrong. I know where you are. I know what you've done. And unless you return immediately, I will make sure everyone at Blackridge Hall knows exactly what kind of woman you are. You have 1 week. R.W. Clara crumpled the letter in her fist, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. He was going to destroy her. He was going to tell the Duke everything, the lies, the theft, the scandal. And when he did, Adrian would throw her out without a second thought, or worse. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the candle flame, and felt the walls closing in. She'd survived 3 weeks on the run. She'd survived walking into the Duke's study. She'd survived her first days in this cold, unforgiving house. But this might be the thing that finally broke her, unless she fought back. Clara stood slowly, her jaw set, and tossed the letter into the candle flame. It caught immediately, curling into ash. She wasn't running anymore. If her stepfather wanted a war, she'd give him one. But first, she needed to do something she'd sworn she'd never do. She needed to tell the Duke the truth. Shahakt. The next morning, Clara knocked on the Duke's study door. Enter. She stepped inside, her heart hammering, and found Adrian sitting at his desk, reading through yet another stack of reports. He didn't look up. I need to speak with you, Clara said, her voice steadier than she felt. Then speak. She closed the door behind her and took a breath. I lied to you, she said, about why I'm here. That got his attention. Adrian set down his pen slowly, his eyes locking onto hers. Go on. Clara's throat tightened, but she forced the words out. I didn't just leave my last position. I ran. From my stepfather. He's dangerous, controlling, and he's been looking for me. And now he's found you, Adrian said flatly. Clara's stomach dropped. How did you... I had you investigated the moment you walked into this house. Adrian's voice was ice cold. Did you think I wouldn't? Of course he had. Then you know, Clara said quietly. You know what kind of man he is. I know he's claiming you stole from him. Adrian leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. I know he's threatened legal action, and I know he's offered a substantial reward for your return. Clara's hands clenched into fists. I didn't steal anything. He's lying. Why should I believe you? Because I'm standing here telling you the truth. Clara's voice rose and she forced herself to breathe. I could have run again. I could have disappeared the second that letter arrived, but I didn't. Because I'm not a thief and I'm not a coward and I'm done letting him control my life. Silence. Adrian stood slowly, rounding the desk until he was standing directly in front of her. He was taller than she'd realized, and the weight of his gaze was suffocating. If I protect you, he said quietly, I risk my reputation, my household, everything I've built. So tell me, Clara Whitmore, why should I take that risk? Clara met his eyes, refusing to look away. Because you've spent your whole life controlling everything around you, she said, and you know what that costs. You know what it's like to be alone, surrounded by people who obey you but don't trust you. You've built walls so high that no one can get in, and you think that makes you strong. Adrian's jaw tightened. But it doesn't, Clara continued, her voice softer now. It just makes you lonely. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Adrian stepped back, his expression cold once more. You have 1 week to prove your worth, he said. If you can clean up the corruption in my household, expose whoever's been stealing, and show me you're more than just another desperate stranger, I'll consider protecting you. Clara's breath caught. And if I can't? Then you're on your own. He turned away, dismissing her. Clara stood there for a moment, her heart pounding, and then nodded. 1 week, she said quietly, and walked out of the study with fire in her veins. She had 7 days to save herself, and she wasn't going to waste a single one. Clara didn't sleep that night. She sat at the small desk in her room, a single candle burning low, and mapped out every corner of Blackridge Hall in her mind. 7 days. That's all she had to prove she wasn't just another liability the Duke needed to dispose of. The theft wasn't random. It was too consistent, too careful. Someone had been doing this for months, maybe years, and they were smart enough to cover their tracks. But smart didn't mean invisible. Everyone made mistakes. She just had to find the crack. By the time the morning bells rang, Clara had a plan. She started in the kitchen. Cook was a mountain of a woman named Agnes, with flour-dusted hands and a voice that could crack stone. She ran the kitchen like a general commanding troops, and nothing, absolutely nothing, happened in her domain without her knowing about it. Morning inventory needs checking, Clara said, stepping into the organized chaos of breakfast preparation. I need to see your supply records for the past 3 months. Agnes looked up from a pot of porridge, her thick eyebrows rising. Records? What for? Discrepancies, Clara said simply. Someone's been skimming. I need to figure out who. Agnes wiped her hands on her apron, her expression darkening. You think someone in my kitchen is stealing? I think someone in this household is stealing, Clara corrected. And the kitchen's a good place to start. Supplies come through here. People talk here. If something's off, you'd notice. Agnes stared at her for a long moment, then jerked her chin toward a cluttered office in the corner. Records are in there, but if you're planning to throw accusations around, you'd better have proof. I will, Clara said. She spent the next 2 hours buried in ledgers, cross-referencing delivery records with usage logs. The numbers were a mess. Sloppy handwriting, missing dates, entire weeks skipped over. But slowly, a pattern emerged. Every second Thursday, supplies came in short. Not by much. A sack of flour here, a case of wine there. Small enough that it looked like clerical errors. But when Clara added it all up, it amounted to thousands of pounds worth of goods over the past year. And every second Thursday, the same name appeared on the receiving log. Thomas Grimshaw. Head footman. Clara's pulse quickened. She'd seen Grimshaw around the estate. Tall, polished, always smiling. The kind of man who knew how to charm his way through a room. The kind of man people trusted. She closed the ledger and stood, her jaw set. Now she just had to prove it. But confronting Grimshaw directly would be stupid. He was popular with the staff, had been working at Blackridge Hall for over a decade, and had the Duke's ear. If Clara accused him without solid evidence, it would be her word against his, and she'd already used up most of her credibility just staying alive this long. No, she needed to catch him in the act. That night, Clara didn't go to bed. She slipped out of her room just after midnight, moving through the silent hallways like a ghost. The estate was massive, and every creak of the floorboards sounded like cannon fire in the stillness. She made her way to the storage cellars, the ones that held wine, preserved goods, and anything valuable enough to lock away. If Grimshaw was moving stolen supplies, he'd have to do it when the house was asleep. Clara found a shadowed alcove behind a stack of crates and settled in to wait. An hour passed, then 2. Her legs cramped, her eyes burned. She was starting to think she'd gotten it wrong when she heard footsteps. She pressed herself deeper into the shadows, barely breathing. The cellar door creaked open, and a figure slipped inside carrying a lantern. The light caught his face for just a moment. Grimshaw. He moved quickly, unlocking one of the wine cabinets with a key that shouldn't have been in his possession. He pulled out 3 bottles, expensive ones, judging by the way he handled them, and tucked them into a canvas sack. Clara's heart hammered. She had him. But before she could move, another voice cut through the darkness. "Working late, Thomas?" Clara froze. The Duke. Adrian stepped into the cellar, his expression unreadable in the lantern light. He was still dressed, which meant he hadn't been sleeping either. Had he been following Grimshaw? Or her? Grimshaw straightened immediately, his charming smile sliding into place like a mask. "Your Grace, I was just stealing," Adrian finished, his voice flat. "Don't insult me with excuses." The smile faltered. Grimshaw set the sack down carefully, his hands raised. "It's not what it looks like." "Then what is it?" Grimshaw's jaw worked. "I have debts, gambling debts. I was going to pay it all back, I swear." "With my wine?" Adrian's tone didn't rise, but the cold fury beneath it was unmistakable. "How long has this been going on?" Grimshaw didn't answer. Adrian took a step closer. "How long?" 2 years, Grimshaw said quietly. The silence that followed was suffocating. Adrian's gaze flicked to the shadows where Clara was hiding, and she realized with a jolt that he'd known she was there the whole time. "Come out," he said. Clara stepped into the light, her chin lifted. Grimshaw's eyes widened. You set me up." "I followed the numbers," Clara said evenly. "You got sloppy." Grimshaw's face twisted. "You've been here less than a week, and you think you can—" "Enough." Adrian's voice cut through the room like a blade. He turned to Grimshaw. "You're dismissed. Effective immediately. Pack your things and be gone by morning. If I ever see you near this estate again, I'll have you arrested." Grimshaw stared at him, his face pale. "Your Grace, please, get out." Grimshaw grabbed the lantern and stumbled toward the door, casting one last venomous look at Clara before disappearing into the darkness. The cellar fell silent. Adrian turned to Clara, his expression still unreadable. "You were supposed to report your findings to Mrs. Halloway." "I needed proof," Clara said, "and I got it." "You also put yourself in danger." Adrian's eyes narrowed. "What if he'd been armed? What if he'd attacked you?" "Then I would have handled it." "You're reckless." "I'm effective," Clara shot back. "And you're welcome, by the way." Adrian stared at her for a long moment, and she couldn't tell if he was furious or impressed. Maybe both. "You have 6 days left," he said finally. "Don't waste them." He turned and walked out, leaving Clara standing alone in the cellar, her heart still racing. She'd done it. She'd exposed the thief. She'd proven her worth. But the look in Adrian's eyes told her this was only the beginning. The next morning, news of Grimshaw's dismissal spread through the estate like wildfire. The staff whispered in corners, shooting glances at Clara whenever she passed. Some looked impressed, others looked wary. Mrs. Halloway, however, looked downright suspicious. She cornered Clara in the linen closet before breakfast. "You've made an enemy," she said bluntly. "Grimshaw had friends here, loyal ones. They won't forget this." "Good," Clara said, folding a sheet with sharp, precise movements. "Let them remember what happens when someone steals from this house." Mrs. Halloway's mouth thinned. "You're playing a dangerous game, girl. The Duke may have let you stay, but that doesn't mean you're safe." "I've never been safe," Clara said quietly. "But I'm still here." The housekeeper studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Just watch your back." Clara spent the rest of the day reorganizing the storage systems, creating new logs. and training the younger maids on proper inventory procedures. It was tedious, exhausting work, but it kept her mind off the clock ticking down. 6 days. She was making progress. The household was running smoother already. But there was still one problem she couldn't solve. Her stepfather. The letter had said 1 week. That deadline was approaching fast, and Clara had no idea what he was planning. Would he come here himself? Send someone else? Go straight to the Duke with his accusations? She needed leverage, something to fight back with. That evening, as the staff sat down for their meal in the servants' hall, Clara noticed something strange. One of the footmen, a quiet, nervous young man named Peter, kept glancing at her, then looking away quickly, as if he wanted to say something but didn't dare. After the meal, Clara caught him in the hallway. "Peter," she said, "you've been staring at me all night. If you've got something to say it." Peter's face flushed. I shouldn't. It's not my place. Since when has that stopped anyone in this house?" Clara crossed her arms. "What is it?" He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "There's a man asking questions about you, in the village." Clara's blood turned cold. "What kind of questions?" "About where you came from, who you are." "He's offering money for information." Peter swallowed hard. "Some of the staff have been talking about selling what they know." Clara forced herself to breathe. "Who's talking?" "I don't know, but Miss Eliza mentioned it to one of the maids this morning. She said someone could make a month's wages just for telling this man where you sleep." Clara's hands clenched into fists. Her stepfather wasn't just threatening her, he was buying allies inside the house. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for telling me." Peter nodded and hurried away, leaving Clara standing in the empty hallway with her mind racing. She couldn't fight this alone. Not anymore. She needed to tell the Duke. Clara found Adrian in his study that night, bent over a stack of correspondence. He didn't look up when she entered. "He's here," she said without preamble. "In the village, asking questions, offering money." Adrian set down his pen slowly. "Your stepfather?" "Yes." "And you think he'll try to turn my own staff against you?" "I know he will." Clara stepped closer. "He's done it before. He's good at finding people's weaknesses. And if he gets inside this house, he won't." Adrian stood, moving to the window. The lamplight caught the sharp angles of his face, making him look more statue than man. "I've already taken precautions," he said. "The staff has been warned that any contact with this man will result in immediate dismissal. The gates are being watched, and I've sent word to the village magistrate to keep him under observation." Clara blinked. You did all that?" "You're under my protection now." Adrian's voice was matter-of-fact. "That means his fight with you is a fight with me." Something in Clara's chest tightened. She didn't know what to say. "But," Adrian continued, turning to face her, "that protection has limits. If he escalates, if he goes public with accusations or brings legal action, I can't shield you without damaging my own position. You understand that, don't you?" Clara nodded. "I do." "Then you need to decide." Adrian's gaze was intense, searching. "Do you want to keep hiding, or do you want to fight back?" "I want to fight," Clara said immediately. "But I don't know how." "Then let me help you." The words hung in the air between them. Clara stared at him. "Why would you do that?" Adrian was silent for a moment. "Because you were right," he said finally, "about what you said in this room, about walls and loneliness." He looked away. "I've spent years building a fortress around myself, and I'm tired of living in it." Clara's breath caught. "But I need to know," Adrian continued, his voice low. "What did you take from him? What is he really accusing you of?" This was it. The moment of truth. Clara could lie. She could soften the story, make herself look better. But she was so damn tired of lying. "I took his ledgers," she said, "the ones that proved he was embezzling from his own business. He'd been stealing from his partners for years, blaming his losses on bad investments. When I found out, I made copies. I was going to take them to the authorities." Adrian's eyes narrowed. And he caught me before I could." Clara's voice hardened. "He locked me in my room for 3 days, no food, no water. He said if I ever tried to expose him, he'd make sure I hung for theft instead. So I ran." "Do you still have the copies?" Clara shook her head. "I had to leave them behind." Adrian was quiet for a long moment. his expression unreadable. Then he walked to his desk, unlocked a drawer, and pulled out a piece of parchment. "Write down everything you remember," he said. "Names, dates, amounts, every detail. If we're going to fight him, we need ammunition." Clara took the parchment with shaking hands. "You believe me?" "I investigated him too," Adrian said, "and your story matches what I found. He's not just a brute, he's a criminal, and criminals make mistakes." Clara's eyes burned. She blinked hard, refusing to let the tears fall. "Thank you," she whispered. Adrian nodded once. "Get to work. We don't have much time." Clara spent the next 3 days writing. Every transaction she could remember, every name, every lie her stepfather had told. Her hand cramped, her eyes blurred, but she didn't stop. Meanwhile, Adrian worked his own channels. He sent letters to business contacts in London, made discreet inquiries, called in favors. And slowly, a picture began to emerge. Richard Whitmore wasn't just embezzling. He was running a smuggling operation on the side, using his legitimate business as cover. He had debts to dangerous people, people who wouldn't hesitate to destroy him if they knew he was vulnerable. "If we expose him," Adrian said, spreading the evidence across his desk, "he'll lose everything, his business, his reputation, possibly his freedom." Clara stared at the documents. "And if we don't? Then he'll keep coming after you, forever." Clara took a breath. "Do it." Adrian's eyes met hers. "Are you sure? Once this starts, there's no going back." "I'm sure." He nodded. "Then we move tomorrow." But they didn't get the chance. That night, as Clara was finishing her rounds, a scream echoed through the house. She ran toward the sound, her heart pounding, and found Eliza collapsed in the hallway, sobbing. "What happened?" Clara dropped to her knees beside the girl. He was here," Eliza gasped. "In the house. He grabbed me, told me to give you a message." Clara's blood turned to ice. "Who?" "A man. Big. Angry." Eliza's hands were shaking. He said you have until tomorrow night, or he'll burn this place to the ground." Clara stood slowly, fury rising in her chest like a wildfire. He'd crossed the line. He'd brought violence into this house, into her home. She turned and ran toward the Duke's study, not bothering to knock. Adrian looked up sharply. "What?" "He was here," Clara said, her voice shaking with rage. "He threatened the staff. He threatened your house." Adrian's expression went cold, dangerous. "Then it's time to end this," he said. He stood, pulling on his coat, and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" Clara demanded. "To the village." Adrian's voice was ice. "To have a conversation with Mr. Whitmore. You can't just watch me." He walked out, leaving Clara standing in the empty study, her heart hammering. She should have felt relief. The Duke was handling it. But all she felt was dread, because men like her stepfather didn't respond to reason. They responded to violence. And Clara had a terrible feeling that tonight someone was going to pay in blood. Clara didn't wait. The moment Adrian disappeared into the night, she grabbed her cloak and followed. She knew it was reckless. She knew the Duke had explicitly told her to stay put. But the image of Eliza's terrified face kept flashing through her mind, and the thought of Adrian confronting her stepfather alone, without knowing just how brutal Richard Whitmore could be, made her stomach twist. The village was a 20-minute walk from the estate, but Clara ran half of it, her boots pounding against the muddy road. By the time she reached the main square, her lungs burned and her legs felt like lead. The inn sat at the far end of the street, its windows glowing warm against the darkness. Clara slowed, her heart hammering, and spotted Adrian's carriage parked outside. She was too late to stop him, but maybe not too late to help. She pushed through the inn's door, and the noise hit her immediately. Laughter, clinking glasses, the smell of ale and smoke. A few heads turned her direction, curious, but most of the patrons ignored her. Then she heard Adrian's voice, cold and cutting, coming from the private room at the back. "You made a mistake coming here." Clara moved closer, staying in the shadows near the doorway. "Did I?" Richard Whitmore's voice was smooth, mocking. "I don't think so, Your Grace. In fact, I think you're the one who made a mistake. Harboring a thief, a liar, my own stepdaughter, no less." Clara's hands clenched. Hearing his voice again after all these weeks made her skin crawl. "Clara Whitmore is under my protection," Adrian said. And unless you want to face charges for trespassing and threatening my household, I suggest you leave. Tonight." Richard laughed. It was a cold, ugly sound. "Charges? From you? Don't make me laugh. You have no idea who you're dealing with." "I know exactly who I'm dealing with." Adrian's voice didn't rise, but the menace in it was unmistakable. A coward who embezzles from his own business. A man with debts he can't pay. A criminal hiding behind respectability. The room went silent. Clara's breath caught. Adrian had just laid it all out, everything they'd uncovered. When Richard spoke again, his voice was no longer mocking. It was dangerous. "You've been busy." "I protect what's mine," Adrian said, "and I destroy what threatens it. You have until sunrise to leave this county. If you're still here when the sun comes up, I'll have you arrested. And I'll make sure every one of your creditors knows exactly where to find you." Clara heard the scrape of a chair. Footsteps. "You think you're untouchable, don't you?" Richard's voice was closer now, venomous. "You think your title makes you safe, but I've dealt with men like you before. Men who think they can buy loyalty, respect, power. Get out." "I'm not done." I said, "Get out." Clara heard the unmistakable sound of a fist hitting flesh. She lunged through the doorway without thinking. The scene that greeted her was chaos. Adrian had Richard pinned against the wall, one hand wrapped around the older man's collar. Richard's lip was split, blood trickling down his chin, but his eyes were full of rage, and in his hand, half hidden behind his back, was a knife. "Adrian!" Clara's scream cut through the room. Adrian's head snapped toward her, and in that split second of distraction, Richard moved. He shoved the Duke back and slashed wildly with the blade. Adrian jerked to the side, but not fast enough. The knife caught his shoulder, tearing through fabric and flesh. Clara didn't think. She grabbed the nearest thing, a heavy pewter pitcher from a side table, and hurled it at Richard's head. It connected with a sickening crack. Richard staggered, the knife clattering to the floor, and Adrian was on him in an instant. He slammed Richard against the wall again, harder this time, and the older man crumpled. Adrian stood over him, breathing hard, blood soaking through his shirt. Clara rushed to his side. "You're hurt." "I'm fine," Adrian bit out, but his face was pale. "You're bleeding everywhere. That's not fine." The innkeeper appeared in the doorway, eyes wide. "Your Grace, I'll send for the constable." "Do it," Adrian said, "and fetch a doctor." He turned to Richard, who was groaning on the floor, one hand pressed to his head. "You're done. Finished. By morning, everyone will know what you are." Richard looked up, his eyes glassy but still full of hate. "You'll regret this," he slurred. "Both of you." Adrian didn't respond. He just turned and walked out, his movement stiff. Clara followed, her heart still racing. Outside, the night air was cold and sharp. Adrian leaned against the carriage, pressing a hand to his shoulder. The blood was already seeping through his fingers. "Let me see," Clara said, pulling his hand away gently. The cut wasn't deep, but it was long and ugly, running from his shoulder halfway down his bicep. "You need stitches," Clara said. "I need to get back to the estate." Adrian's jaw was tight. "Before word spreads." "Word's gonna spread anyway." Clara ripped a strip of fabric from her underskirt and pressed it against the wound. "You just attacked a man in public, in a tavern. That's going to be all over the county by breakfast." Adrian's eyes met hers. "He pulled a knife." "I know. I saw." Clara tied the makeshift bandage as tightly as she could. "But that doesn't mean people will believe it. Not everyone trusts you the way—" She stopped. "The way you do?" Adrian finished, his voice quieter now. Clara looked up. "I didn't say that. You didn't have to." For a moment, they just stood there, inches apart, the sounds of the village fading into the background. Then Adrian winced, and the spell broke. "Get in the carriage," Clara said. "We're going home." The ride back to Blackridge Hall was tense and silent. Adrian sat across from her, his face drawn, his hand pressed against the bandage. Clara watched him, her mind racing. He'd fought for her, risked his reputation, his safety, for someone he barely knew. Why? When they reached the estate, Mrs. Halloway was waiting at the door, her face pale. "The staff is talking," she said immediately. "Word came back from the village. They're saying you attacked a man, Your Grace." "I defended myself," Adrian said curtly. "Send for the doctor, and gather the senior staff in the drawing room. Now." Mrs. Halloway nodded and hurried off. Adrian turned to Clara. "Go to your room." "No." His eyes narrowed. "That wasn't a request." "I don't care." Clara crossed her arms. "You're about to address the staff about what happened tonight, and they need to hear my side of it too, unless you plan on lying." Adrian stared at her for a long moment. Then, incredibly, the corner of his mouth twitched. "You're impossible. I've been told." 20 minutes later, the senior staff stood assembled in the drawing room. Mrs. Halloway, cook, the head groundskeeper, and 3 of the senior footmen. They all looked nervous. Adrian stood at the front, his shoulder freshly bandaged by the doctor, his expression unreadable. "I'm sure you've heard the rumors by now," he began. "So let me clarify what happened. Tonight, I confronted a man named Richard Whitmore. He's been harassing one of my staff, Clara Whitmore, and tonight he escalated that harassment into threats of violence against this household." The staff exchanged glances. "During the confrontation," Adrian continued, "Whitmore attacked me with a knife. I defended myself. He's now in the custody of the local constable, facing charges of assault and trespassing. That is the truth. And if anyone spreads a different version of events, they will be dismissed immediately. Are we clear?" Silence. Then Mrs. Halloway spoke. "And Miss Whitmore's relationship to this man?" "He's her stepfather," Adrian said flatly. "And a criminal. She came to this household seeking refuge from him. I granted it. That decision stands." Clara felt every pair of eyes turn to her. "She's proven her worth," Adrian added, his voice firm. "She exposed theft within this household. She's reorganized systems that have been failing for years, and she's earned her place here. If anyone has a problem with that, speak now." No one spoke. "Good," Adrian said. "Then we're done. Return to your duties." The staff filed out quietly, leaving Clara and Adrian alone. Clara let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "That went better than I expected." "They're afraid," Adrian said, not convinced. "Does it matter? As long as they obey." "It matters." Adrian turned to face her, and for the first time she saw exhaustion in his eyes. Real, bone-deep exhaustion. Fear only works for so long. Eventually people need a reason to stay. A reason to be loyal. "And what's your reason?" Clara asked quietly. Adrian didn't answer. He just walked to the window, staring out into the darkness. Clara followed. "You didn't have to do what you did tonight. You could have sent the constable. Let the law handle it." "The law takes time," Adrian said, "and he was threatening you. Threatening this house." He paused. "I don't let threats stand." "Even when it costs you?" Adrian's jaw tightened, especially then. Clara studied his profile. The sharp lines, the controlled stillness, the way he held himself like a man constantly at war with the world. "You said you were tired of living in a fortress," she said softly. "But you're still building walls. Just different ones." Adrian turned to her, something flickering in his eyes. "And what about you? You ran from your stepfather, but you're still letting him control you, still letting fear make your decisions." Clara's breath caught. "That's not, isn't it?" Adrian stepped closer. "You could have stayed hidden, kept your head down. But you followed me tonight. You threw yourself into danger. Why?" "Because I—" Clara stopped, the words catching in her throat. "Because she cared. Because the thought of him getting hurt made her chest ache. Because somewhere along the way, this cold, impossible man had become someone she couldn't stand to lose, but she couldn't say that, not yet." "Because you needed backup," she finished lamely. Adrian's expression softened, just barely. "Right." They stood there in the silence, the space between them charged and fragile. Then Adrian stepped back. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be difficult." Clara nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her at the door. "Clara." She looked back. "Thank you," Adrian said quietly. "For the picture." Despite everything, Clara smiled. "Any time." The next morning brought chaos. News of the confrontation had spread like wildfire, and by breakfast half the county seemed to know that the Duke of Blackridge had brawled with a man in a public inn. The whispers grew louder, the speculation wilder. Some said Adrian had been defending his honor. Others claimed he'd been drunk. A few insisted the whole thing was a scandal involving a mysterious woman. Clara stayed out of sight, working in the storage rooms, but she could feel the tension crackling through the house like lightning before a storm. Then, just after noon, a carriage arrived. Clara was in the linen closet when Mrs. Halloway found her, her face grave. "You need to come with me," the housekeeper said. "What's wrong?" "The magistrate is here, with the constable. They want to speak with you." Clara's stomach dropped. "Why?" "Because Richard Whitmore is claiming self-defense. He's saying you and the Duke conspired to attack him, that you lured him to the inn and set him up." Clara's hands went numb. "That's insane." "I know, but they have to investigate, and they want your testimony." Clara followed Mrs. Halloway to the drawing room, her heart pounding. Inside, Adrian stood by the fireplace, his face like carved stone. Two men sat on the sofa, one in a magistrate's robes, the other in a constable's uniform. The magistrate looked up as Clara entered. He was an older man with shrewd eyes and a neatly trimmed beard. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "please, sit." Clara sat, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "I'll be direct," the magistrate continued. "Mr. Richard Whitmore has filed a formal complaint. He claims that you and the Duke orchestrated an attack on him last night, that you used false accusations to lure him into a confrontation." "That's a lie," Clara said, her voice steady. "Then tell me your version of events." Clara took a breath and told him everything. The abuse, the embezzlement, the threats, the evidence they'd gathered, the knife. The magistrate listened without interrupting. When she finished, he turned to Adrian. "Your Grace, do you have proof of these allegations against Mr. Whitmore?" Adrian walked to his desk and pulled out the documents they'd compiled. "Everything's here. Business records, witness statements, correspondence. Whitmore is a criminal, and last night he tried to kill me to keep that quiet." The magistrate reviewed the papers in silence. The room felt airless. Finally, he looked up. "This is substantial. If accurate, Mr. Whitmore is facing serious charges, but I'll need time to verify these documents. In the meantime," he paused, "I'm afraid I have to ask both of you not to leave the county until this matter is resolved." Clara's chest tightened. "How long will that take?" "A few days? Maybe a week." A week. Another week of waiting, of looking over her shoulder. But at least Richard was in custody. At least he couldn't... The door burst open. The constable who'd been guarding the entrance stumbled in, his face white. "Sir, there's been an incident." The magistrate stood. "What kind of incident?" "Richard Whitmore. The constable swallowed. "He's escaped custody." The room went deathly silent. "What?" Adrian's voice was deadly quiet. "We were transferring him to the county jail. The carriage was ambushed on the road. 3 men, armed. They killed one of the guards and took Whitmore." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. Adrian crossed the room in 2 strides. "Where?" "About 5 miles south. We sent men after them, but nothing." Adrian turned to the magistrate. "I want every available man searching, now." The magistrate nodded, already moving toward the door. "We'll find him, Your Grace." But Clara knew better. Richard was gone, and he was going to come back. Not for money, not for his reputation, for revenge. As the officials hurried out, Clara stood frozen, her mind racing. Adrian turned to her, his expression grim. "He'll come here," she said quietly. "He knows where I am, and he's not going to stop until I'm dead," Adrian finished. "Or you are." Clara met his eyes. "So what do we do?" Adrian was silent for a moment, then his jaw set, and she saw the steel beneath the surface. "We prepare," he said. "And when he comes, we end this, once and for all." That night, Blackridge Hall turned into a fortress. Adrian ordered the gates locked and barred. Guards were posted at every entrance. The staff was confined to the inner wings. Windows were shuttered. Every lamp in the outer corridors was extinguished. Clara stood in the main hallway, watching the preparations, and felt like she was standing in the calm before a hurricane. Adrian appeared at her side, his expression hard. "I want you in the safest room in the house, the one with the reinforced door." "And where will you be?" "Watching the approaches." Clara grabbed his arm. "If he comes, he won't come alone. You saw what happened with the carriage. He has men now, dangerous men." "Then we'll be ready." "Adrian, This isn't negotiable, Clara. Adrian's voice was firm, but his eyes were softer. I'm not letting him take you. I don't care what it costs. Clara's throat tightened. Why are you doing this? Because... Adrian stopped, something unspoken flickering across his face. Because you were right, about everything. I've spent my whole life afraid of letting anyone close, afraid of being vulnerable. But you walked into my study and refused to be dismissed, and for the first time in years, I felt alive. Clara's heart stuttered. I'm not good at this, Adrian continued, his voice rough. I don't know how to... He broke off, frustrated. But I know I won't let him hurt you, not while I'm still breathing. Clara stepped closer, her hand still on his arm. Then we protect each other. Adrian's gaze held hers. Deal. The hours crawled by. Clara sat in the reinforced room, a small study on the second floor with thick walls and a single narrow window, and listened to the silence. No footsteps. No shouts. Nothing. But the quiet felt wrong. Heavy. Like the world was holding its breath. Then just past midnight she heard it, glass shattering. Clara was on her feet instantly, her heart hammering. She pressed her ear to the door and heard shouts from below, running footsteps, the clang of metal. They were inside. She grabbed the fireplace poker, the only weapon in the room, and yanked the door open. The hallway was dark, lit only by a single flickering lamp. She could hear the sounds of fighting echoing from the main floor, grunts, crashes, someone screaming. Clara ran toward the stairs, her pulse roaring in her ears. She reached the landing and froze. Below, in the entrance hall, chaos reigned. 4 men, rough, armed with clubs and knives, were fighting Adrian's guards. 2 guards were already down. The rest were barely holding their ground. And in the center of it all stood Richard Whitmore, his face twisted with rage. He looked up and saw her. Their eyes locked. Richard smiled, cold, vicious, triumphant. There you are, he said, and started up the stairs. Clara didn't run. She gripped the poker tighter and stood her ground. You made a mistake coming here, she said, her voice shaking but loud. Richard laughed. Did I? Looks to me like your precious Duke can't protect you after all. He's not the one you should be worried about. Richard's smile widened. And what are you going to do, Clara? Hit me with that little stick? If I have to. He lunged. Clara swung the poker with everything she had. It connected with his shoulder, and Richard howled, staggering back. But he didn't fall. He grabbed the poker, wrenching it out of her hands, and shoved her hard against the wall. Clara's head cracked against the plaster, stars exploding in her vision. You always were too stubborn for your own good, Richard hissed, his hand closing around her throat. Clara clawed at his fingers, gasping for air. Then, from somewhere below, a roar. Get away from her! Adrian appeared at the bottom of the stairs, blood streaming from a cut above his eye, his jacket torn. He looked like a man possessed. Richard turned, momentarily distracted, and Clara drove her knee up hard. Richard doubled over with a grunt, and Clara shoved him away. Adrian was up the stairs in seconds. He grabbed Richard by the collar and slammed him into the banister with bone-rattling force. You're done, Adrian snarled. Richard spat blood. You think you've won? You think this is over? It is now. Adrian hauled him down the stairs, where the remaining guards were already subduing the last of Richard's men. The constable arrived minutes later with reinforcements. This time, Richard Whitmore was shackled, gagged, and thrown into a reinforced cell with armed guards at every entrance. It was over. Clara stood in the entrance hall, shaking, her throat bruised, her head pounding. Adrian appeared at her side, his hand gently touching her shoulder. Are you hurt? He asked, his voice raw. I'm fine, Clara managed. You? I'll live. They stood there in the wreckage of the hall, surrounded by overturned furniture and shattered glass, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Then Clara started laughing. It was a broken, half-hysterical sound, but she couldn't stop. Adrian stared at her. What's so funny? We survived, Clara said, wiping at her eyes. We actually survived. Adrian's expression softened. Yeah, we did. And for the first time since she'd arrived at Blackridge Hall, Clara felt something she hadn't felt in years. Safe. Safe. The word felt strange in Clara's mouth, like a language she'd forgotten how to speak. She stood in the destroyed entrance hall, Debris scattered around her feet, and realized her hands had stopped shaking. Adrian was still beside her, close enough that she could feel the tension radiating off him. His shirt was torn, blood staining the collar, and there was a cut above his eyebrow that would definitely scar. But he was alive. They both were. "Your Grace." The magistrate approached, stepping carefully over broken glass. His expression was grim, but something else too. Impressed, maybe. "I owe you an apology. We underestimated how dangerous Whitmore was." "Yes," Adrian said flatly. "You did." The magistrate had the grace to look uncomfortable. "He'll be transported to London tonight, under heavy guard. I'll personally ensure he reaches trial." "See that you do," Adrian said. "Because if he escapes again, I'll hold you responsible." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. The magistrate nodded and retreated, barking orders at his men. Clara watched Richard being dragged out in chains, his face purple with rage. He was shouting something, curses probably, or more threats, but she couldn't hear the words over the ringing in her ears. She'd spent so long running from this man, hiding, afraid that one day he'd find her and drag her back into the nightmare she'd escaped. But now, watching him being hauled away like common trash, she felt something crack open inside her chest. Not relief. Not yet. Freedom. Adrian touched her elbow gently. "Come on, let's get you looked at." "I'm fine. Clara." His voice was quiet but firm. "Your neck is bruised. Your head's bleeding. You're not fine." She wanted to argue, but the exhaustion hit her all at once, and she found herself nodding. The doctor was already treating the injured guards in the drawing room. He took one look at Clara and pointed to a chair. "Sit. Now." Clara sat. He examined her throat first, his fingers gentle but thorough. "You're lucky. Another few seconds, and he might have crushed your windpipe. As it is, you'll be sore for a week. No talking more than necessary." "That'll be difficult for her," Adrian said from the doorway. Clara shot him a look, and despite everything, he almost smiled. The doctor cleaned the cut on her head, just a shallow gash from hitting the wall, and wrapped a bandage around it. "You'll live, but you need rest. Real rest. No running around, no heroics." "I'll make sure of it," Adrian said. After the doctor left, Clara leaned back in the chair, suddenly too tired to move. Adrian sat across from her, his own injuries bandaged, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. "What happens now?" Clara finally asked, her voice rough. "Now?" Adrian rubbed his face. "Now we clean up, repair the damage, and figure out how to explain to the entire county why the Duke of Blackridge had a small war in his entrance hall." "Think they'll believe the truth?" "Some will. Others won't care as long as there's gossip." Adrian's jaw tightened. "But Richard's crimes will come out during the trial. The embezzlement, the smuggling, everything. By the time it's over, no one will question why I protected you." Clara looked down at her hands. "And the staff? They saw everything tonight." "They did." Adrian's voice softened. "They also saw you stand your ground when a man twice your size tried to kill you. That counts for something." Clara wasn't sure she believed him, but she was too tired to argue. Mrs. Halloway appeared in the doorway, looking more rattled than Clara had ever seen her. "Your Grace, the staff is asking what they should do. Half the entrance hall is destroyed. There's blood on the floors." "Leave it until morning," Adrian said. "Everyone's had enough for one night. Just make sure the windows are secured and the doors are locked." Mrs. Halloway nodded and started to leave, then hesitated. She looked at Clara, her expression unreadable. "You fought well tonight, girl," she said quietly. "Not many would have stood their ground like that." It wasn't praise exactly, but coming from Mrs. Halloway, it might as well have been. "Thank you," Clara managed. The housekeeper nodded once and disappeared. Adrian stood, wincing slightly. "Come on, I'll walk you to your room." "I can walk myself." "I know you can, but I'm doing it anyway." Clara didn't have the energy to fight him. They walked through the quiet hallways, past shuttered windows and locked doors. The estate felt different now, like it had been tested and survived, like the walls themselves had been holding their breath and could finally exhale. When they reached Clara's door, she turned to face Adrian. He looked exhausted, his usual controlled mask slipping just enough that she could see the man underneath. "Thank you," she said, "for everything, for believing me, for fighting for me." Adrian was quiet for a moment. I didn't do it because I'm noble, he said finally. I did it because I wanted to. Because you walked into my study and refused to be invisible, and it made me realize how tired I was of surrounding myself with people who only tell me what I want to hear. Clara's throat tightened. I still don't understand why you trust me. Because you don't lie to make things easier, Adrian said. You tell the truth even when it costs you. That's rare and valuable. He paused. And because you threw a pitcher at a man's head to save my life. That helps. Despite everything, Clara smiled. I have good aim. Apparently. They stood there in the dim hallway, and Clara became acutely aware of how close he was standing. Close enough that she could see the faint scar on his jaw, the flecks of gold in his gray eyes. Get some rest, Adrian said quietly. Tomorrow's going to be chaos. Isn't it always? Fair point. He turned to leave, and Clara almost let him go, but something made her reach out, her fingers catching his sleeve. Adrian stopped, looking back. I'm glad I walked into your study that night, Clara said. Even with everything that's happened. I'm glad. Adrian's expression softened in a way she'd never seen before. So am I. Then he was gone, and Clara was alone in her tiny room, her heart still racing for reasons that had nothing to do with danger. The next morning, Blackridge Hall woke to chaos. Word of the attack had spread overnight, and by breakfast half the county seemed to have descended on the estate. Neighbors came to offer support, or more likely, to get a closer look at the damage. Officials arrived to take statements. Even a reporter from the London papers showed up, pencil in hand, asking pointed questions about scandal and violence. Adrian handled it all with the cold efficiency of a general managing a battlefield. He gave statements, deflected gossip, and made it very clear that anyone who tried to paint Clara as anything other than a victim would answer to him personally. Clara stayed mostly out of sight, working with Mrs. Halloway to coordinate repairs and keep the household running. But she could feel the change in how the staff looked at her. Before, she'd been an outsider, a charity case the Duke had inexplicably taken in. Now, she was something else. Eliza approached her in the linen closet that afternoon, her eyes wide. Is it true you fought him off yourself, before his grace arrived? Clara shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. I hit him with a poker. It wasn't exactly heroic. You stood up to him, Eliza pressed. Everyone's talking about it. How you didn't run. How you protected the Duke. He protected me too, Clara said. That's how it works. But Eliza wasn't the only one. Throughout the day, other staff members found excuses to speak with her, to thank her for exposing Grimshaw's theft, to ask her opinion on household matters, to treat her less like a servant and more like someone who belonged. It was strange, unsettling, and something Clara didn't entirely know how to handle. By evening, the worst of the chaos had died down. The broken glass had been swept up, the damaged furniture removed, the blood scrubbed from the floors. Blackridge Hall was starting to look like itself again. Clara was in the study, reviewing supply orders, when Adrian walked in. You should be resting, he said. So should you. Clara gestured to the bandage still visible above his collar. How's the shoulder? Sore, but I'll live. Adrian sat on the edge of his desk, studying her. The magistrate sent word. Richard's transport reached London safely. He's being held in Newgate until trial. Clara let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Good. It gets better. Adrian pulled a folded letter from his jacket. One of Richard's former business partners came forward. Apparently he's been keeping records of Richard's illegal dealings for years, waiting for the right moment to use them. With your testimony and this evidence, the prosecution says Richard's looking at 20 years minimum. 20 years. Clara's hands went numb. He's really gone. He's really gone, Adrian confirmed. He can't hurt you anymore. The words should have brought relief. Joy. Something. Instead, Clara just felt hollow. She'd spent so long living in fear of this man, building her entire existence around staying hidden, that now that he was gone, she didn't know what to do with herself. Adrian seemed to sense her struggle. It takes time, he said quietly, to believe you're actually safe, to stop looking over your shoulder. How would you know? Because I've spent my entire life doing the same thing. Adrian's voice was rough. Different reasons, maybe. But the fear is the same. Clara looked up at him. What are you afraid of? Adrian was silent for a long moment. Losing control, he said finally. letting someone in and having them use it against me, becoming my father. The last words came out bitter, and Clara realized this was the first time he'd ever mentioned his family. What was he like? She asked carefully. Cruel. Adrian's jaw tightened. He saw kindness as weakness, trust as a liability. He taught me that the only way to survive was to be harder, colder, more ruthless than everyone around me. He paused. And for a long time, I believed him. And now? Now I'm trying to figure out who I am when I'm not just trying to survive. Adrian met her eyes. You've helped with that, whether you realize it or not. Clara's chest tightened. I didn't do anything. You challenged me, Adrian interrupted. From the first moment you walked in here. You didn't bow or scrape or tell me what I wanted to hear. You demanded to be seen, and it made me realize how tired I was of being invisible too. The air between them felt charged, fragile. I'm not good at this, Adrian continued, his voice low. At letting people in, at trusting. But I want to try. With you. Clara's breath caught. Adrian? A knock at the door shattered the moment. Mrs. Halloway stepped in, her expression carefully neutral. Your Grace, Lord Ashford has arrived. He's asking to see you. Adrian's entire demeanor shifted, walls slamming back into place. Tell him I'll be there in a moment. Mrs. Halloway nodded and left. Clara stood. I should go. No. Adrian's hand caught hers, gentle but firm. Stay, please. This won't take long. Before Clara could respond, a man swept into the room. Lord Ashford was everything Adrian wasn't. Tall, charming, with an easy smile and clothes that probably cost more than Clara made in a year. He looked like someone who'd never had a hard day in his life. Adrian! Ashford clapped Adrian on the shoulder, ignoring the wince. I heard about your little adventure. The whole county's buzzing. I'm sure they are, Adrian said dryly. Ashford's eyes landed on Clara, and his smile widened. And you must be the infamous Miss Whitmore, the woman who brought the great Duke of Blackridge to his knees. I did no such thing, Clara said, disliking him immediately. Modest, too. How refreshing. Ashford turned back to Adrian. I came to offer my support, old friend. Whatever you need, character witnesses, legal counsel, a friendly word with the right people, it's yours. I appreciate it, Adrian said, though his tone suggested otherwise. Of course, there will be talk, Ashford continued, settling into a chair uninvited. A duke harboring a fugitive, brawling in taverns, getting attacked in his own home. It's quite the scandal, but I'm sure your reputation can weather it, eventually. Clara's hands clenched. She wasn't a fugitive, she was escaping abuse. Ashford waved a dismissive hand. Semantics, my dear. What matters is how it looks. And right now, it looks like Adrian risked everything for a woman he barely knows. People will wonder why. Then let them wonder, Adrian said coldly. My decisions are my own. Are they? Ashford's smile didn't reach his eyes. Or have you simply traded one kind of cage for another? The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Adrian stood slowly, his voice deadly quiet. Get out. Ashford blinked. Adrian, I'm only trying to— What? Get out. The smile finally fell from Ashford's face. He stood, adjusting his jacket. Very well. But when this all blows up in your face, don't say I didn't warn you. He left without another word. Clara let out a breath. He seems pleasant. He's a snake, Adrian said flatly. Always has been, but his family has influence, and I need their support for some business matters. Or I did, anyway. Did? Adrian looked at her, something fierce in his eyes. I'm done playing politics. I'm done pretending. If people have a problem with my choices, they can take it up with me directly. Clara felt something shift in her chest. You're going to lose allies. Then they weren't really allies to begin with, Adrian said. I'd rather stand alone with my integrity intact than surround myself with people like Ashford. You won't be standing alone, Clara said quietly. Adrian's expression softened. No? No. Clara stepped closer. You've got me. For whatever that's worth. It's worth everything. The words hung between them, weighted with meaning. Before Clara could respond, voices echoed from the hallway. More visitors, more questions, more chaos. Adrian sighed. This is going to be a long week. Probably, Clara agreed. But we'll handle it. We? Clara smiled. You said you wanted to try. With me. So yes, we. And for the first time since the attack, Adrian smiled back. Not the cold, controlled expression he usually wore. A real smile, genuine and unguarded. It changed his entire face. The week that followed was indeed chaos, but a different kind than before. The trial preparations consumed most of Adrian's time, and Clara found herself managing more and more of the household's day-to-day operations. Mrs. Halloway started consulting her on decisions. The staff stopped questioning her orders. Even Cook grudgingly admitted that Clara's new inventory system had cut waste by nearly a third. Slowly, almost without realizing it, Clara stopped feeling like an outsider. She was becoming part of Blackridge Hall, not as a servant exactly, but as something more. And people were starting to notice. One afternoon, Clara was reviewing the week's accounts when a group of the younger maids approached her, hesitant. Miss Clara? Eliza spoke for the group. We were wondering if you could teach us what you know about household management. Clara blinked. Why? Because you're good at it, another maid said. Better than anyone we've seen, and we want to learn. Clara looked at their eager faces and felt something warm unfurl in her chest. All right, she said. Tomorrow morning, 6 sharp. Don't be late. They scattered, excited, leaving Clara alone with her ledgers and a strange, unfamiliar feeling. Pride. That evening, Adrian found her in the library, curled up in a chair with a book she wasn't actually reading. You're teaching the maids, he said, not quite a question. Word travels fast. Mrs. Halloway mentioned it. She seemed pleased. Adrian sat across from her. You're changing this place. You know that, don't you? Clara shrugged. I'm just trying to make things run better. It's more than that. Adrian leaned forward. The staff respects you. They listen to you. They trust you. That's not something you can force. It has to be earned. I guess I earned it then. You did. Adrian paused. And I've been thinking about your position here. Clara's stomach tightened. My position? You're not a maid anymore. Everyone knows it. You're managing half the household, solving problems, making decisions that would normally fall to the housekeeper. Adrian's eyes met hers. I want to make it official. Head of household operations. Salary to match. Your own quarters in the main wing. Clara's breath caught. Adrian, it's not charity, he said firmly. It's recognition. You've proven your worth 12 times over. This is just making the reality match the title. Clara sat back, her mind spinning. A real position, real authority, a place in this house that wasn't contingent on charity or pity, a place she'd earned. What about the talk? She asked. People are already gossiping about us, about why you're protecting me. This will just make it worse. Let them talk, Adrian said. I'm done caring what people think. I know the truth. You know the truth. That's what matters. Clara studied his face, looking for any sign of doubt or hesitation. She found none. All right, she said finally. I accept. Adrian smiled. Good. We'll announce it tomorrow. Tomorrow? Clara's eyes widened. That's fast. The trial starts in 3 days. I want this settled before then. I want everyone to know exactly where you stand. Adrian's voice was firm. With me. As an equal. The word equal hung in the air, and Clara felt something shift between them. Something fundamental. Thank you, she said quietly, for believing in me. For giving me a chance when no one else would. You didn't need me to give you a chance, Adrian said. You made your own. I just had the sense to get out of your way. That night, Clara lay in her small bed for the last time and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow, everything would change. Again. But this time she wasn't running towards safety. She was stepping into power. The announcement the next morning sent shockwaves through the household. Mrs. Halloway made it official in front of the assembled staff, her voice crisp and professional. Effective immediately, Miss Clara Whitmore has been appointed head of household operations. She'll be working directly with me and reporting to His Grace. You'll show her the same respect you'd show any senior member of this household. Are we clear? There was a moment of stunned silence. Then slowly, heads began to nod. Clara stood at the front of the room, her hands clasped behind her back to hide their shaking, and watched the staff process the news. Some looked pleased, Others looked skeptical. A few looked downright hostile, but none of them objected out loud. After the meeting dispersed, Mrs. Halloway pulled Clara aside. "You've got enemies now," the housekeeper said bluntly. "People who think you rose too fast. Who'll be watching for you to make a mistake?" "I know," Clara said. "Good. Then you'll be careful." Mrs. Halloway's expression softened slightly. "But for what it's worth, I think the Duke made the right choice. You've got a head for this work, and the spine to back it up." Coming from Mrs. Halloway, it was high praise. "Thank you," Clara said. "Don't thank me yet," the housekeeper said. "The real test starts now." She wasn't wrong. Over the next 2 days, Clara faced resistance at every turn. Orders were questioned. Decisions were second-guessed. Supplies mysteriously went missing, forcing her to track them down. It was exhausting, frustrating, and exactly what Clara had expected. But she didn't back down. When a footman challenged her authority, she calmly reminded him that insubordination meant dismissal. When supplies vanished, she implemented a new tracking system that made it impossible to steal without getting caught. When whispers spread about her relationship with the Duke, she faced them head-on. "If you have something to say," she told a group of gossiping maids, "say it to my face, otherwise get back to work." They got back to work. Slowly, grudgingly, the resistance began to fade. And on the third day, when the trial began in London, Clara stood in the Duke's study beside Adrian, reviewing the final evidence, and realized something had changed. She wasn't fighting to survive anymore. She was fighting to protect what she'd built. "They're calling you to testify tomorrow," Adrian said, setting down a letter from the prosecution. "Are you ready?" Clara took a breath. "Yes. It won't be easy. Richard's lawyers will try to discredit you. They'll bring up your past, your position here, your relationship with me." "Let them," Clara said. "I know who I am now, and I'm not afraid of him anymore." Adrian looked at her, something like pride in his eyes. "No, you're not." The courtroom was packed. Clara stood in the witness box, her hands folded, and faced the man who terrorized her for years. Richard Whitmore sat at the defendant's table, dressed in prison clothes, his face gaunt, but his eyes still full of venom. The prosecutor was a sharp woman named Mrs. Blackwell, and she wasted no time. "Miss Whitmore, please describe your relationship with the defendant." Clara's voice was steady. "He married my mother when I was 15. After she died 3 years later, he became my legal guardian." "And how did he treat you?" He was controlling, abusive. He used me as free labor in his household and denied me any independence." "Objection," Richard's lawyer stood. "Hearsay and emotional manipulation." "Overruled," the judge said. "Continue, Miss Whitmore." Clara told the story. All of it. The locked rooms, the threats, the ledgers she'd discovered, the night she'd fled. The courtroom was silent. When she finished, Mrs. Blackwell nodded. "And when you came to Blackridge Hall, did you tell the Duke about your past?" "Not at first. I was afraid." "Of what?" "That no one would believe me. That he'd send me back." Clara's eyes met Richard's across the room. "But I was wrong. The Duke believed me, and he helped me gather evidence to prove what Richard really was." "Objection!" Richard's lawyer was on his feet again. "This is a clear attempt to—" "To tell the truth," Mrs. Blackwell cut him off, "which is what this court is here to determine." The judge nodded. "Overruled. Sit down, counselor." The cross-examination was brutal. Richard's lawyer tried everything, painting Clara as a scorned runaway, a manipulative opportunist, a woman using the Duke for protection. But Clara didn't break. She answered every question calmly, factually, without rising to the bait. And when it was over, when she stepped down from the witness box, she caught Adrian's eye in the gallery. He nodded once. She'd done it. The trial lasted another 2 days. Witnesses testified. Evidence was presented. Richard's former business partners came forward with damning testimony about his smuggling operations. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty. On all counts. Sentencing was immediate, 25 years. Clara stood outside the courthouse afterward, watching the prison transport carry Richard away, and felt the last chain around her chest finally snap. He was gone. Really, truly gone. Adrian appeared at her side. How do you feel? Clara thought about it. Free. Good. Adrian's hand brushed hers. Because you are. They stood there in the London afternoon, and Clara realized the truth. She'd walked into Blackridge Hall with nothing but desperation and defiance. She was walking out with a position, a purpose, and something she'd never expected to find. A home. The words settled into Clara's bones as they rode back to Blackridge Hall in the Duke's carriage. She watched the countryside roll past the windows, the same road she'd walked weeks ago, desperate and alone, and marveled at how different everything looked now. Adrian sat across from her, quiet but present. He'd barely spoken since they left the courthouse, but Clara could feel something building in the silence between them, something that had been growing since the night she'd thrown that picture at Richard's head. Maybe longer. "What are you thinking?" she asked finally. Adrian glanced at her, a faint smile tugging at his mouth. "That you're going to be insufferable now that you've won." Clara laughed despite herself. "I haven't won anything. The court did its job." "You stood up there and told your truth in front of a room full of strangers who wanted to tear you apart," Adrian said. "And you didn't flinch. That's a win." Clara looked down at her hands. They weren't shaking anymore. "I had help." "You did it yourself," Adrian corrected. "I just made sure you had the tools." The carriage hit a bump, jostling them both, and Clara's shoulder brushed against Adrian's. Neither of them moved away. "What happens now?" Clara asked quietly. "When we get back." "Now?" Adrian leaned back, considering. "Now we rebuild. The estate. The household. Whatever damage the last few weeks caused." He paused. "And we figure out what comes next." "What do you want to come next?" Adrian met her eyes, and Clara saw something raw there, something that made her breath catch. "I want to stop pretending," he said. "I want to stop building walls between myself and the people I actually care about." "And who do you care about?" Clara's voice came out softer than she intended. Adrian didn't answer with words. He just held her gaze, and that was answer enough. The rest of the ride passed in charged silence. They arrived at Blackridge Hall just as the sun was setting, painting the estate in shades of amber and gold. The staff had lined up at the entrance, not formally, but in small clusters, watching. Clara climbed out of the carriage and felt every eye on her. Mrs. Halloway stepped forward, her expression carefully neutral. "Welcome back, Miss Whitmore, Your Grace." "Thank you, Mrs. Halloway," Clara said. Then something unexpected happened. Eliza started clapping. It was tentative at first, just her hands coming together, but then Peter joined in, then Cook, then the rest of the staff, one by one, until the entrance hall echoed with applause. Clara stood frozen, her throat tight. Mrs. Halloway's mouth twitched into what might have been a smile. "They're proud of you," she said quietly. "We all are." Clara didn't trust herself to speak. She just nodded and walked inside, blinking hard against the sudden burning in her eyes. The next few days blurred together. Clara threw herself into work, reorganizing systems, training staff, implementing the changes she'd been planning for weeks. Adrian was busy too, meeting with business contacts and repairing relationships that had been strained by the scandal. But every evening, they found time to talk, sometimes in his study, reviewing household accounts, sometimes in the library, sharing a quiet drink, sometimes just walking the grounds as the sun set, talking about everything and nothing. Clara learned things about Adrian she'd never expected. That he hated formal dinners but loved good wine. That he'd wanted to be an architect before his father died and duty called. That he'd been engaged once, years ago, to a woman who'd only wanted his title. "What happened?" Clara asked one evening as they stood on the terrace. "She made her priorities clear," Adrian said. "And so did I. We ended it before either of us wasted more time." "Do you regret it?" "No." Adrian's voice was firm. "I regret not ending it sooner. I wasted years trying to be what she wanted instead of figuring out what I wanted." "And what do you want now?" Adrian turned to face her, and the intensity in his eyes made Clara's pulse skip. "Someone real. Someone who'll challenge me when I'm wrong and stand beside me when I'm right. Someone who doesn't want me for my title or my money or what I can give them." "That's a tall order," Clara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe." Adrian stepped closer. "But I think I've already found her." Clara's breath caught. "Adrian, I know this is complicated," he said. "I know people will talk. I know it goes against every rule of propriety and social expectation, but I don't care anymore. I'm tired of living by other people's rules. So am I, Clara admitted. Then what do we do about it? Clara looked up at him, at this man who'd risked everything to protect her, who'd believed her when no one else would, who'd shown her what it meant to be seen, and made a decision. We make our own rules, she said. Adrian smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away, but Clara didn't move. When his lips met hers, it was gentle at first, tentative, like they were both testing the reality of this moment. Then Clara's hands found his jacket, pulling him closer, and gentle became something else entirely. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. That was long overdue, Clara finished. I was going to say worth waiting for, but yes, that too. Clara laughed, and Adrian kissed her again, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Clara felt completely, utterly at peace. But peace, she was learning, was never permanent. The backlash came exactly 1 week later. It started with whispers, then letters, then a formal visit from Lord Ashford and 3 other members of the county's most prominent families. Adrian received them in the drawing room with Clara at his side, a deliberate choice that made their intentions impossible to ignore. Ashford's smile was tight and cold. Adrian, we need to discuss your situation. My situation is my own business, Adrian said flatly. Is it? Ashford glanced at Clara, his expression dripping condescension. When the Duke of Blackridge publicly aligns himself with a woman of questionable background, it becomes everyone's business. Your reputation affects all of us. Miss Whitmore's background is none of your concern, Adrian said, his voice dropping to a dangerous level. But it is, insisted another man, Lord Pemberton, a pompous bore with too much money and not enough sense. She was a servant. Now she's running your household, living in the main wing, appearing at your side at public events. People are asking questions, Adrian. Uncomfortable questions. Let them ask, Adrian said. You're not thinking clearly, Ashford pressed. This woman has you under some kind of spell, but shit. Clara stood abruptly. This woman is standing right here, and if you're going to insult me, at least have the courage to do it to my face. Ashford's smile turned vicious. Very well. You're a social climber, an opportunist who wormed her way into the Duke's good graces and is now exploiting his temporary infatuation. The room went deathly silent. Clara walked toward Ashford slowly, deliberately, until she was standing directly in front of him. He was taller, broader, everything about him designed to intimidate. She didn't flinch. You're right about one thing, Clara said quietly. I did climb. I climbed out of abuse. I climbed away from a man who tried to destroy me. And when I got here, I kept climbing, by working harder than anyone else, by proving my worth, by refusing to be invisible just because people like you think I should be. How dare you? I'm not finished, Clara cut him off. You want to talk about questionable backgrounds? Let's talk about yours. 3 gambling debts settled quietly by your family. 2 mistresses you keep in London. A habit of cheating at cards that everyone knows about but no one mentions because you've got the right last name. Ashford's face went purple. You insolent... The difference between us, Clara continued, is that I earned my place here. You inherited yours. So if the Duke chooses to trust someone who's proven themselves over someone who's coasting on family money, maybe the problem isn't with his judgment. She turned to the others. Any of you want to continue this conversation, or are we done? Lord Pemberton cleared his throat awkwardly. Perhaps we were hasty. Perhaps you were, Adrian said, his voice cold as winter. And perhaps you should remember that my choices are mine to make. If you don't like them, there's the door. Ashford stood, his face still red. You're making a mistake, Adrian. The only mistake I made was tolerating your presence this long, Adrian replied. Get out, all of you. They left, muttering among themselves, and Clara sank back into her chair, her hands shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. Adrian moved to her side immediately. Are you all right? I just told off half the county's elite, Clara said, her voice slightly unsteady. I think I'm either very brave or very stupid. Brave, Adrian said firmly. Definitely brave. He paused. Also possibly a little reckless, but I'm starting to find that charming. Clara laughed despite herself. You're going to lose friends over this? Over me. They weren't friends, Adrian said. They were leeches, and I'm better off without them. But the scandal will pass. Adrian took her hand. And even if it doesn't, I don't care. I've spent my whole life worrying about what people think, trying to maintain some perfect image. I'm done. I'd rather have one real connection than 100 false ones. Clara squeezed his hand. You're sure? I've never been more sure of anything. That night, Adrian called a meeting of the entire household staff. Every servant, every worker, everyone who kept Blackridge Hall running. They assembled in the great hall, confused and curious. Adrian stood at the front with Clara beside him, and when he spoke, his voice carried through the room. I'm sure you've all heard the rumors, he began, about Miss Whitmore, about our relationship, about the scandal. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. So let me make something very clear, Adrian continued. Clara Whitmore is not my mistress. She's not my servant. She is the head of household operations, and she's earned that position through skill, determination, and courage. She's also the woman I love. Clara's breath stopped. They hadn't said those words yet. Not out loud. Adrian turned to her, his expression open in a way she'd never seen. I should have said it sooner, but I'm saying it now. I love you, and I don't care who knows it. The room was silent. Then Mrs. Halloway started clapping. Again. And just like before, the rest of the staff joined in. Clara felt tears prick her eyes, but this time she didn't fight them. Adrian pulled her close, right there in front of everyone, and kissed her. The applause grew louder. Over the next few months, things settled into a new rhythm. Some families did cut ties with Adrian. Invitations dried up. Social circles closed their doors. But others, the ones that mattered, stayed. And new connections formed. Business partnerships based on respect rather than status. Friendships built on honesty. Clara flourished in her role. She expanded the training program for younger staff, implemented new systems that made the household run more efficiently than it had in decades, even started a small lending library for the servants, something unheard of in most great houses. The estate began to change, slowly, subtly, but unmistakably. It became a place where hard work was rewarded, where people were valued for their skills rather than their birth. Where Clara Whitmore, former runaway, former servant, sat at the Duke's right hand and no one questioned it. Well, almost no one. 6 months after the trial, a letter arrived. Clara was in her office, a real office now on the main floor, when Mrs. Halloway brought it in. This came by special courier, the housekeeper said, her expression unreadable. Clara broke the seal and read. Then read again. What is it? Mrs. Halloway asked. It's from Richard's business partners, Clara said slowly. The ones who testified. They're offering me a position. A position? Managing the liquidation of Richard's assets, overseeing the sale of his properties. They say I'm the only one who knows his operations well enough to untangle the mess. Clara looked up. They're offering to pay me. A lot. Mrs. Halloway's eyebrows rose. What will you do? Clara thought about it. Part of her wanted to refuse immediately. She'd built a life here, a purpose, and the thought of leaving Blackridge Hall made her chest ache. But another part of her, the part that had walked into Adrian's study and demanded to be heard, recognized the opportunity. This wasn't just about money. It was about power, real power, the kind that came from dismantling the empire of a man who'd tried to destroy her. I'm going to do it, Clara said, but on my terms. That evening, she told Adrian, he listened quietly, his expression unreadable. It would mean traveling to London for a few weeks, Clara said. Maybe longer. I'd have to leave the estate in Mrs. Halloway's hands. She's capable, Adrian said. I know, but... Clara hesitated. What do you think? Honestly. Adrian stood and walked to the window. For a long moment he didn't speak. Then, I think you'd be a fool not to take it. Clara blinked. Really? Really? Adrian turned to face her. When you first came here, you were running from something. Now you have a chance to run towards something, to take control of the very thing that nearly destroyed you and use it to build something better. He smiled slightly. That's not an opportunity you walk away from. But what about us? Us? Adrian crossed the room and took her hands. Clara, I'm not going anywhere. and neither are you, not permanently. You'll go to London, you'll do this work, and you'll come back. We'll survive a few weeks apart. You're sure? I'm sure. He kissed her forehead. Go. Tear Richard's empire apart. Make something good from the ashes. I'll be here when you get back. Clara left for London 2 weeks later. The work was brutal. Richard's business affairs were even more tangled than she'd imagined. Debts layered on debts, false contracts, shell companies designed to hide illegal operations. But Clara had learned from the best. She applied everything she'd picked up managing Blackridge Hall: the attention to detail, the systematic approach, the refusal to accept excuses. Slowly, methodically, she unraveled it all. And as she did, something interesting happened. Other business owners noticed. Women, mostly. Widows managing inherited companies, daughters trying to navigate industries that didn't want them. They started asking for her help. Clara found herself consulting on accounts, advising on operations, teaching the same skills that had saved her life. And she was good at it. By the time she returned to Blackridge Hall 2 months later, she had a dozen clients and a reputation that preceded her. Adrian was waiting at the entrance when her carriage pulled up. He looked thinner, tired, and relieved to see her. Clara practically fell into his arms. 2 months, Ishura, Adrian said into her hair. That was too long. I know, Clara said. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. Adrian pulled back to look at her. You did something extraordinary. I'm proud of you. Clara smiled. I missed you. I missed you too. He kissed her, slow and thorough, and Clara felt like she'd finally come home. Inside, the staff had prepared a small celebration, nothing formal, just cake and wine and genuine happiness at her return. Mrs. Halloway pulled her aside. The estate ran fine while you were gone, she said. But it's better with you here. Thank you, Clara said, for everything. Don't thank me yet, Mrs. Halloway said, her eyes twinkling. His grace has been insufferable without you. You owe me for putting up with him. Clara laughed. That night, she and Adrian sat in the library, catching up on everything that had happened. So what now? Adrian asked. You've got clients in London, a growing business. Are you going to split your time between here and there? I thought about it, Clara admitted. But no, this is home. I'll take on clients I can manage from here and travel only when absolutely necessary. You're sure? Because if you wanted to move to London permanently, You'd what? Clara challenged. Adrian smiled ruefully. I'd follow you, like a lovesick fool. Good thing I'm not going anywhere then. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Adrian said, There's something I need to ask you. All right. He stood and walked to his desk, pulling out a small box. Clara's heart stuttered. Adrian returned and knelt in front of her chair. I've spent my whole life following rules, he said, doing what was expected, being who I was supposed to be. And I was miserable. Then you walked into my study and threw all of that out the window. You challenged me, changed me, made me want to be better. He opened the box. Inside was a ring, simple, elegant, with a single stone that caught the lamplight. I know this is unconventional, Adrian continued. I know it breaks every rule of courtship and propriety. But I don't care. Clara Whitmore, will you marry me? Clara stared at him, her eyes burning. Yes, she whispered. Yes. Adrian slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into a kiss that made her forget every hard thing she'd ever endured. Because this moment, this man, this life she'd fought so hard to claim was worth it all. The wedding was small by aristocratic standards. Just family, close friends, and the household staff. No grand spectacle, no society drama, just two people who'd found each other in the wreckage of their respective wars, choosing to build something new together. Clara wore a simple dress. Adrian cried during the vows. Mrs. Halloway threw the most elaborate celebration the servants' hall had ever seen. And when it was over, when the guests had left and the estate had settled into quiet, Clara and Adrian stood on the terrace and looked out over the grounds. Do you ever think about where we'd be if you hadn't walked into my study that night? Adrian asked. Clara considered it. Sometimes, but not often. I'm too busy thinking about where we're going. And where is that? Forward, Clara said simply. Together. Adrian wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her close. I like the sound of that. In the years that followed, Blackridge Hall became known for something new, not just as the seat of a powerful duke, but as a place of innovation, of second chances. Clara's consulting business grew. She helped dozens of women navigate the brutal world of business and estate management. Some of them even came to work at Blackridge, learning directly from her before going off to run their own operations. The household itself transformed. Under Clara and Mrs. Halloway's joint leadership, it became a model of efficiency. Other estates sent their staff to train there. Articles were written about the Blackridge method, and through it all, Clara and Adrian built a partnership that defied every expectation. They fought, of course. Clara was too stubborn, and Adrian was too proud for it to be otherwise. But they also laughed, worked together, supported each other through every challenge that came their way. 5 years after Clara first walked into Blackridge Hall, she stood in the same study where it all began and looked around. The room had changed. The desk was different. New curtains hung at the windows. Even the air felt lighter somehow. But the essence remained. This was where she'd fought for her life, where she'd demanded to be seen, where she'd met a man who'd been just as lost as she was and found a way forward together. Adrian appeared in the doorway. "There you are. I've been looking everywhere." "Just thinking," Clara said. "About what?" "About that night, when I first came here." Clara smiled. "I was so scared, so desperate. I had no idea what I was doing." "You knew exactly what you were doing," Adrian said, moving to her side. "You were fighting, surviving, refusing to give up." "I almost did. So many times." "But you didn't." Adrian took her hand. "You're stronger than you think. You always have been." Clara leaned into him. "We both are." "Together," Adrian agreed. And standing there in that study, Clara realized the truth. She hadn't just survived. She'd won. Not because she'd defeated Richard or earned her position or married a duke. She'd won because she'd reclaimed herself, her voice, her power, her right to choose her own path. Everything else was just the aftermath. Downstairs, the household was preparing for the evening meal. Voices echoed through the halls, laughter, conversation, the sounds of people who felt valued and safe. Clara had done that. She and Adrian together. They'd taken a cold, rigid fortress and turned it into something warm, something alive, something that felt finally and completely like home. "Ready for dinner?" Adrian asked. Clara squeezed his hand. "Ready." They walked out of the study together, leaving the door open behind them, and headed toward the sounds of life and laughter filling the halls. Behind them, the room stood empty but not abandoned, because some battles, once fought, never needed to be fought again, and some victories lasted forever.